Do plant proteins count towards your daily total protein intake for the day? All right, that's a question I got asked the other day, and this is something that comes up a lot in the fitness world because there's a lot of talk historically about plant proteins being incomplete. Of course, you have vegans and other people who say that plant proteins are 100% absorbable, they're the perfect proteins, and that animal proteins cause cancer. And the reality of this is somewhere in the middle. In other words, yes, you can count your plant proteins, but there's a couple of problems and things that we need to keep up with, and we need to understand the reason these myths get started. A lot of people will say, look, plant proteins are completely incomplete, they're missing some of the basic amino acids, and therefore when we talk about reaching 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight, we're talking about purely animal source proteins. And this idea was actually spawned by the supplement industry, who make their living, or at least to at one point. Now they've branched into so many things it's not so much the case, even though protein powders are still probably the biggest source of income for the supplement industry. But they make their living selling protein, so they tell people that they usually need more than they really do. Now, I made a video the other day explaining how certain individuals who want a recomposition and things actually can benefit from very large amounts of protein overfeeding. But the truth is, the amount of protein that you need to gain muscle mass is actually a lot less. It's a lot less than what people have been told historically. It's not 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. It's usually between 1 and 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. So putting that into perspective, take someone like me who weighs 220 pounds. Which is about 100 kilos. That means, according to people in the supplement industry, that someone like me would need at least 220 grams of protein. Whereas the truth is, a strength athlete of my body weight probably needs somewhere between 100 160 grams of protein in order to gain muscle if I was lean bulking. Now, because I'm recomping right now and I have an enormous appetite, in order to control my food intake better, I actually do take in more than either of those recommendations. But if we were talking about purely for muscle gain, assuming diet was perfect and on point, training was perfect and on point, no, I wouldn't need anywhere near 200 grams. So you need to understand that there is a financial incentive for a whole industry to promote this idea. Now, on the other hand, the opposite end of the spectrum, the idea that you need much less than what I just said, kind of comes out of the whole vegan world, and they want people to believe that you could sustain yourself on 5 or 10% of your calories coming from protein, and that you can gain muscle just fine, and that you can go on to be very athletic and strong, and you can deadlift 700 pounds eating 60 grams of protein a day, and all sorts of nonsense, and that they can come from plants. Again, people have personal biases. So when we take the personal bias away, we go back to there's a range that is your minimums to gain maximum amounts of muscle mass. And the reason you have a range is because it's assumed you're eating a variety of quality of protein sources. The truth is, most plant proteins are complete protein sources. In fact, in terms of amino acid profile, there's some of them that have better profiles than beef or chicken or turkey. In terms of, again, the protein quality is determined by how close the ratios of essential amino acids match what we have in our bodies as humans. Now, most plants are below that, and the thing to remember is that most plants are relatively low in protein. So the problem we run into is not just protein quality from plants, it's bioavailability. Fiber, phytonutrients, all sorts of other things happening in plants can reduce the absorption, as well as not having the correct enzymes to break them down always, because humans have not historically ever gotten all of our protein from plants. And we certainly at no point in history for 10 or 20,000 years straight did we ever get most of our protein from a single plant source either on top of that. So we as a species are not particularly well suited to getting our protein from plants as a primary protein source. We can do it. We are good at consuming a wide variety of foods, and particularly because we cook our food, that removes the need for a lot of the enzymes to break a lot of these things down. That's one of the big benefits of being human, is that we cook our foods. We have an additional digestive process involved in food cooking that has allowed us to eat a wider variety of foods than just about any other species on Earth, and live to be healthy, die at an old age, and live full lives, even in environments that we historically are not indigenous to. So cooking itself bypasses a lot of those problems, and it does allow us to absorb a lot more protein from plants. But we do not absorb it as effectively as we do most animal source proteins. Now, the problem we get into with answering this question is, well, how much of it do we absorb? You can't answer that because it's going to vary so much. You're going to have to actually go research every single plant protein source to get an answer. You're going to find one protein source from a plant that you might have a 60% total bioavailability from, and another one that you have 95% bioavailability from. See the problem here? The problem is we don't know exactly. That's why it's important that we have ranges as far as total protein intake goes. So when I tell people, that 100, 160 grams, again, if you weigh 220, again, assuming a small calorie surplus, assuming you are not trying to recomp or anything like that, purely for a muscle gain phase. And you might need to increase that when you want a recomposition. You might want to add another 50 grams. Or if you want to cut, you might need to add even more. So the problem we get into is that we need to look at it in terms of ranges of protein intake, because each individual protein source is going to have a different bioavailability. And for example, if you were getting almost all of your protein from something like egg whites or whey protein or something else like that, you could consume less protein, total protein, to get the anabolic benefits you want and the tissue repair and building benefits that you want, as if you were consuming a mixture of beans and rice and pasta and legumes with some meat thrown in there. You're probably going to need a lot more protein. You're going to need more because of the total bioavailability of getting to those essential amino acids that you want, as well as the different ratios of them involved. So again, that's why we have ranges of recommendation. If you're smart, people who really know what they're doing recommend a range. They don't give you, hey, here's a set number, eat this exact amount. Because that exact amount would be assuming that they knew exactly what you needed, number one. Number two, it would be assuming you're consuming only one source of protein with a set bioavailability. That's why it's nonsense. That's why that's gimmicky. So again, we go back to ranges. But if you wanted a fair range, let's say you were going to consume a fair amount of your protein from one day and you had a minimum that you felt you needed to get, like 150 grams. Let's say that you decided that's what you need to intake for some reason. I would recommend you just count the plant source protein slightly less. Because let's say you were eating beans, rice, and chicken that day. I would say maybe take 20% of the protein off of the plant source due to bioavailability issues. In other words, if you consumed 100 grams of protein from beans and rice, or maybe like rice protein powder, because getting 100 grams of protein from beans and rice is a bit of a tall order. That's going to be a lot of calories, and that's going to be a lot of fiber. It's going to be a lot more than most people can handle. So if you were to take about 20% off of that for the bioavailability loss, that's going to be about 80 grams of protein instead of 100, right? And you could fill in the other 70 grams with your chicken, so assume however many ounces of chicken breast that you need to consume to get there. Now, here's the problem we come back to. The problem we come to with plant proteins is that as far as counting them in goes, it shouldn't be a problem counting them in. Total protein is total protein at the end of the day. The problem you run into, of course, is that getting enough protein purely from plants, even for these more conservative numbers that we put out, can be difficult because there's an enormous amount of calories usually in your plants, even ones that are relatively high in protein. There's a lot of fiber. They can be difficult to consume enough of to reach these target numbers, particularly when you're not absorbing all of it. Because again, we go back to the other point. You could get 100 grams of protein from beans and rice. You're not going to get all 100 grams of it. You can get a fair amount. But that's going to be difficult to consume because, again, that is a lot of food volume. It's a lot of food volume, and that's ultimately the real problem. But at the end of the day, can you count plant protein towards your total? Absolutely. just take a little bit off due to bioavailability loss and chalk it into your total. Pretty straightforward. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.